Great. All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Marianne Burnetson. I'm the Associate Director here at the Bob Graham Center for Public Service and one of the primary organizers of these conversations with UF alums and others who work in public service. It is my pleasure to introduce you today to one of our interns, Anna Cavalcante, who will be moderating the program today and introducing our guest speaker. Anna, I'd like to pass it over to you, but right before we get going, just a few quick Zoom reminders. Please make sure that you drop your questions in the chat box or use the raise hand feature. And please remember to keep yourself muted unless you're speaking. Also, we are recording the conversation today, so if you have to leave early, no problem. We'll send a recording out to you later. All right, Anna.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. And welcome, Mr. Mullaney. Mr. Mullaney is a professor and the founding director of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute. He received his bachelor's in political science at the University of Florida in 1977, graduating Phi Beta Kappa and first in the College of Arts and Science. He afterwards attended and graduated from the University of Florida Levin College of Law in 1980. In over 40 years in the private and public sectors, Mullaney has represented diverse public entities, been involved in numerous public policy initiatives and political campaigns, and lectured on legal and public policy topics in more than 20 states. Like I mentioned, he is the founding director of the Institute, which prepares Jacksonville University for university students for leadership and diverse career opportunities in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Now I'll turn the program over to Mr. Rick Mullaney. And a quick reminder to students, please place any questions in the chat box, and we'll have time at the end to answer those. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Anne. It's great to be with all of you. It's always great to be with students from the University of Florida. First, I'm going to start off with something very important. You probably can't tell on Zoom, but I mentioned this to Marianne. I snuck onto campus today at Jacksonville University in my orange and blue. I don't know if you can tell that, but I've got it in my shirt here. University of Florida for undergrad, University of Florida for law school. I'm a very proud Gator, and it's great to be with all of you. I'm going to be very respectful of the time. We're going to open it up to some questions, but today is an opportunity to talk a little bit about you and your future, your thoughts about graduate school in the future, in particular, of course, about what it may look like in terms of a career in law. Of course, we'll talk about law school, criminal justice. I was a prosecutor for a while, public policy, and how all of them relate. And so we'll come back to some questions, but first, real briefly on the biographical piece. I did go to the University of Florida for undergrad and from law school. I have a mixed marriage. My wife went to Florida State. I just thought I'd mention that. As you could probably see from the graphic, I graduated from law school in 1980. If you're doing that math, you're thinking he looks pretty old. So now you're asking the question that everyone asks me, how come at that age you have hair? And so I thought I would give you the answer to that. And that is, when I was younger, I asked God for height and he said no. What happened was I had two younger brothers. We loved playing basketball. Height would be an advantage. I didn't get height, but he gave me the bonus of hair. So here I am older and I think it's okay. And so after graduating from law school, talking about career paths, one of the things I did, which was fairly traditional, is I went to a large firm. At that time, I went to Carlton Fields. Today, they're a firm of over 400 lawyers. They're really national, somewhat international, actually. They were the largest law firm in the state. When I went to them, I went to their Tampa office straight out of law school. And I did business in corporate litigation, which is a career path that we can talk about, a fairly traditional straight out of law school. It was a terrific firm with really terrific lawyers, learned an awful lot. I had a desire at that time, quite frankly, to get into the courtroom. So I returned to Jacksonville, which is my hometown, and I became a prosecutor. And as a prosecutor, I did what prosecutors do in the early parts of their career. We can certainly talk about the criminal justice system. I handled misdemeanor cases, handled felony cases, was in the courtroom quite a bit. I liked trial work. But then I began to get involved because the state attorney at that time went to some of us younger groups and let us, younger guys and gals, and let us start managing the office, began to get involved on the public policy side and began to see what that looked like and its impact on the criminal justice system. Had a role in developing, for example, the diversionary programs for first-time offenders, got involved in creating the special assault unit for sexual assault victims, the career criminal division, which required a statute that we passed in Tallahassee, and the creation of a homicide unit going out in the middle of the night to handle some of those cases. And so I began to see firsthand the impact of public policy in the criminal justice system. In the early 90s, when the state attorney became mayor, a number of us shifted to City Hall. And for the next 20 years, really for 20 years, I was legal counsel and a public policy advisor to three administrations, Ed Austin, John Delaney, and John Payton. During part of that time, I was chief of staff to John Delaney, another fellow who went to the University of Florida for undergrad, University of Florida for law school, He's the former president of the University of North Florida. And during those 20 years, I got very much involved in legal issues. I was general counsel for the city for 13 years and headed up a 40-lawyer public law office, but also got involved on the public policy side, something to talk about today, this sort of relationship between law and public policy and what those career paths can look like. So while I was taking on litigation in the early years, defending the city in lawsuits, very much got involved on the public policy side with Ed Austin. That included involvement in the public-private partnerships that brought the Jacksonville Jaguars to Jacksonville. With John Delaney, I drafted the referendum and some of the legislation that dealt with a $2.2 billion infrastructure plan. That was a half-cent sales tax for infrastructure in Jacksonville that built a new courthouse, new libraries, a downtown library, new baseball park, arena, road improvements. We can have a whole discussion on what infrastructure is. That's a big topic today with the $2.3 trillion proposal by President Biden. But this was a statutory definition of infrastructure, which meant more traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, those kinds of tangible objects for capital spending. Also with John Payton, got very involved in some criminal justice initiatives for the Jacksonville journey because of challenges, quite frankly, with high per capita crime, violent crime here in Jacksonville. The big takeaway from that is not those specific issues, and there are current issues. A proposed gas tax right now to fund about $1 billion infrastructure improvements here in North Florida. In fact, the CEO of the JTA will be the keynote for our board next week. We have a 26-member board here at the Institute to talk about just that. Recently, you may have seen that there was a proposal here in Jacksonville, Lot J, involving the Jacksonville Jaguars, a proposed sale of the JEA. That long litany, you don't have to write down, except to know this. Public policy is clearly consequential. Public policy shapes the future at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. And we certainly could have a discussion of public policy at the national level, the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package that the president passed recently, the $2.3 trillion infrastructure package that's being currently proposed, the $2 trillion package that's coming. We could talk about voting rights and voting legislation at the state level and at the federal level. But at the local level, certainly one of the things I saw very firsthand was how consequential public policy was, and that there was such a significant need to begin to educate, train, and prepare, quite frankly, all of you and others in policy solutions, policy analysis, for leadership and management, for public problems in the public, private, non-public sectors. So after leaving the representation for 20 years, I came to Jacksonville University. We started the Public Policy Institute. And the foundational piece here is the master's degree in public policy. That's the foundational piece. And by the way, my thinking here was, I wasn't the first one to think that. The first MPP degree in the country was conferred by Harvard in the early 1970s. And for many years, Harvard had the traditional MPA, and many of you may be familiar with that. That's a Master in Public Administration. That is a graduate degree in public policy that focuses on the implementation and execution of public policy. A very important degree. Many city managers, for example, with MPA degrees on the implementation and execution of public policy. But the MPP degree at Harvard had a different focus, as it does here. The shift began to be to policy analysis, to policy solutions, to solving public problems, to leadership and management in the public arena. And so they conferred those first degrees. The next year, Cal Berkeley, Michigan, Duke all started programs. Today, there's over 80 in the country. The program here at Jacksonville University was the first in the state of Florida. We're the oldest MPP degree program in Florida, but our approach is simple. We believe that this graduate study, whether it's the MPP, and we have 3 dual degree programs, whether it's the MPP or MPP-JD, MPP-Marine Science, MPP-MBA, is designed to educate and prepare our students for what I just described, this leadership, management, and solving problems in the public, private, non-public sectors. Obviously, there is a close relationship between law and public policy. And in fact, in the course, the best course, by the way, in the MPP degree program is the course on law and public policy. That's the course I teach. And in that course, we will talk about constitutional law, government structure, policy design. We'll talk about a whole host of those things. But we talk about the relationship between law and public policy, and law is actually a subset of public policy. For those who go in, who get their law degree, or for those who get a graduate degree in public policy, such as an MBA or an MPA, there are diverse opportunities there, and it's no one thing. It can mean a variety of things. I want to talk about that in just a second. But I'm sure this group, and I'm assuming that the majority of you are liberal arts majors. I'm sure, I assume that's the true, for most of you, I assume that's true. And there's a movement in the legislature, of course, which I couldn't disagree with more, on how we prioritize liberal arts education. I'm a big supporter of the liberal arts. My oldest daughter, by the way, I think I've mentioned this to some of you when I've been at the Graham Center, her goal when she went off to college was to identify majors that would not produce income. In case you're wondering what that is, that's a double major in English and French, and that way you can ask your parents for money in 2 different languages, which is what she used to do. But I was a very big supporter of her English major, because if you can think critically and you can communicate, there will always be a place for you. And there certainly is a place for her. I'm a big believer in the liberal arts education, but that's a pathway. And so I'd like to briefly talk about admission. So you've got your liberal arts focus, you're thinking about law school or graduate school. How do you get admitted? You may have seen that the University of Florida, there's over 200 law schools in the country. The University of Florida recently, under the tremendous leadership of the dean there, just had the rankings come out at number 21 in the country, which is extraordinary. It wasn't that long ago. It's always been a terrific law school, but it was in the high 40s. And over the last few years, you've just seen the rankings skyrocket for the law school. But whether it's going to one of the 200 law schools or to graduate school, an MPP or an MPA, it's really the same 5 criteria. First, of course, is undergraduate degree and your grades. This won't be a shock to any of you, but if you're thinking about going to law school, if you're thinking about going to graduate school, then certainly they'll be looking at your transcripts. And in particular in law school, they're very quantitative. And so hopefully doing well in the classroom is an important part, of that admission. The second piece, and this is no fun, but they take a holistic view. We take a very holistic view, but I'll tell you, most law schools weigh these first 2 criteria very heavily, and that is the Lsat. For my oldest daughter, who's an English major, I recommended to her, she did go on to law school, to take the Lsat at the end of the junior year, to take a prep course and to have 100 hours of prep time in before the Lsat. It is a test in which there is some improvement from the first time to the second, typically, and it is a test in which preparation can make a difference. And the Lsat is one of the factors that's weighed pretty heavily. Those first 2 factors, by the way, GPA and Lsat, they won't tell you this is directly, but quite frankly, I believe those are kind of a screening device for many law schools as to whether they get to even 3, 4, and 5 on the list. Many won't admit that, but that is the case for some. The other 3 factors are very important, and especially if you have a holistic approach. But for many law schools around the country, doing well in the classroom and reasonably well in the LSAT is an important part of the admissions process. The third piece is 2 letters of recommendation. I suggest on those letters of recommendation that it's somebody who knows you well, someone who you've done well in their class, that can talk not only about your academic ability and likelihood for success in law school. Oftentimes there's a temptation to want to get someone who's got the biggest name, the biggest profile. When I'm chair of our admissions committee, and I think it's more insightful when I get a letter of recommendation from somebody who really knows the student who's applying and can talk about their personal qualities and their academic abilities. 2 letters of recommendation, a resume, of course, which reflects your interests, your passions, your activities. And then finally, of course, the essay, which is 2 pieces. One is it needs to be well written, of course. And then the other piece is it gives you an opportunity maybe to be a little creative and not to write something that everyone else is writing. When my daughter was applying, she would often tailor it to the very law school that she was applying to. And now my son is getting ready to go too. So I'm recommending the same thing for all of you. I believe that this pathway that you're considering, graduate school, it's not for everybody, but I'm a believer it creates opportunities in your future that you wouldn't have otherwise. I believe a law degree does that. I believe a master's degree does that. I believe the substantive knowledge, the skill set, and the opportunities will be greater with that graduate education. And so if the question is, am I bullish? Although some people aren't on going to law school, I am. Am I bullish on going and getting an MPP degree? I am. I can still remember even when I was going, turning to my father and saying, they say there's too many lawyers. And he said, there's always room for somebody good. And I still believe there's always room for somebody good. And as I said to a judge once, I said, are there too many lawyers? He said, there's not nearly enough good ones. And so I want to encourage all of you who are thinking about law school to recognize the fact that that pathway is one that does require some sacrifice. It does require some work, but it can create opportunities for the rest of your career and your professional life. I am someone, and many of you may be like me, I did not come from a family that had lawyers. Nobody in my family had been to graduate school. My father got his high school diploma, his GED, at age 39, and got his education degree from the University of Florida at age 45. He dropped out of high school after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, served for 22 years during World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And he was the only one who had even been to college. And so I didn't have much of a model in terms of what that looks like to practice law, but it created a great pathway for lots of possibilities that you can't even foresee. So you go to law school or you go to graduate school, and the skill set that I would mention to you very briefly, and we're going to open this up to questions, but the skill set that I think is so important, number one is critical thinking, of course, and whatever courses you're taking that help you in that is obviously important. But a second is the ability to communicate well, particularly writing skills. The ability to write and communicate effectively is so fundamental. In my first quarter at the University of Florida, and I really was very grateful for this, we had a writing instructor named Gertrude Block, and there were 100 people in my section. I was in the M through Zs. There were 200 in the entering class that fall and 200 that spring. We were on the quarter system back then. And they said, you know, if you want, for free, you can get with the writing instructor and she'll work with you on your writing. And I think I was one of the only people in my section who did it. I went to her and I spent several weeks, and she would talk to me about practice exams in law school, and she talked to me about, and she worked on my writing. And I really do believe that despite the fact there are a lot of people smarter than me in law school, I was fortunate to do a little bit better. But part of that was the writing help that I got from Gertrude Block. Part of it was knowing how to take some law school exams. Part of it was trying to approach it in a way that made sense, so that when you do go to law school, or if that's your pathway, the writing skills are important, the critical thinking skills are important, but obviously it is one that requires dedication and commitment, but it's very doable. I think some people try to intimidate others with what the graduate school experience is like, or the law school, because you'll hear particularly the first year is very challenging. That's accurate, it is. But if you're showing up for class and if you're coming prepared, you're doing your best, it is very, very doable. When you graduate with your law degree, and of course there's a bar exam, you graduate with a master's degree in public policy, I think this is an exciting thing. I hope you do too. We can have this conversation. There are a lot of possibilities as far as what comes next. I put myself through undergrad and law school, and so going to a large firm made sense for me. They paid well. There were great lawyers, but there are a lot of different possibilities. For those of you who are thinking about the legal path, one thing to keep in mind, for example, is criminal practice versus civil practice. I was fortunate to do both. I did criminal practice when I was a prosecutor. I did civil practice for 20 years when I represented 3 different administrations. On the criminal side, those cases they're interesting. They involve the public. And in a criminal case, of course, the stakes are high. It involves the possibility of someone losing their freedom. And whether you're in the public defender's office or the state attorney's office, whether you're at the U.S. attorney's office, the public defender's office, or in private practice, that criminal practice is something that some people are drawn to. The civil side is very different. The stakes are significant, but it's not the loss of your personal freedom. It's typically about money, and often it's civil disputes. I'm sure you may have possibly seen a commercial involving Morgan & Morgan here in the state of Florida, but they're based out of Orlando. Both of them went to the University of Florida. Ultima Morgan was actually in my class. John Morgan was a year behind me at the University of Florida. That's a great example of civil practice of personal injury cases. But of course, it's not just personal injury cases. You have contract litigation, you have real estate, you have drafting, lots of those involving private parties. In torts, for example, as I teach in my class, the duty is imposed by law to use reasonable care. In contracts, the duty is imposed by the contract itself. But for some, you may have an interest in family law, or an interest in torts, or an interest in real estate. It's very, very diverse. So one thing to keep in mind is criminal versus civil practice. Another thing to keep in mind in that career path is it transactional on the drafting side, or is it the litigation side? The litigation side is what tends to get the headlines. We're watching a criminal trial in Minnesota unfold. I did a lot of that when I was a prosecutor. So you get a lot of headlines for verdicts and going to trial, but actually the litigation side is a small part of the practice of law. The majority of it is the transactional side, whether that's leases, contracts, agreements, negotiations, whatever that may be. So keep in mind the criminal versus civil distinction. Keep in mind the transactional versus the litigation distinction. And then keep in mind when you practice, are you practicing in the public sector? For example, the state attorney's office, public defender's office, the federal government, for example, the U.S. attorney's office or the public defender's office. Are you practicing for a private law firm? It could be a large law firm, a medium-sized law firm, a small firm. Are you practicing in-house with a private law firm or in the nonprofit sector, such as legal aid? I hope those things I went through fairly quickly aren't overwhelming or intimidating. They should not be. It should actually be kind of exciting, because the hope is, whether it's in law or public policy. I'll talk about public policy in a second. The hope is that you will find something that you like and that you'll get what I sort of call the trifecta of your career, which is you do something that pays you reasonably well, you do something that you actually enjoy, and you do something that is consequential, that really that matters. And so the idea there is that there's a lot of possibilities. On the public policy side, the MPP degree, for some, the MPP degree is an alternative for going to law school. For some, it's a pathway for public service. For some, the MPP degree is not just about the public sector, it's also about leadership in the nonprofit. We have several of our MPP graduates that are CEOs or presidents of nonprofit organizations, such as the Prophet, the president of the Clay County Chamber of Commerce. We have several that have been hired by, that are heading up nonprofit organizations. Many go into work for government, many go into the private sector. But the MPP degree too is one of those in particular, in which there's an opportunity to shape the future, not only to make a good living and to like what you do, but to do some good. Our students are graduating and going to work, like I said, in all three sectors, public, private, and nonprofit. For both law and for public policy, there are lots of opportunities and choices. And quite frankly, what's pretty exciting is you don't always foresee what those possibilities are. My grandfather on my mother's side, when he immigrated to this country, he was a factory worker in Detroit, and he worked 7 days a week on the assembly line. And he didn't have the kind of the fortunate possibilities that I've had in my career. But the pathway you're traveling will create possibilities you might not even anticipate. And so for law and for public policy, it creates very diverse opportunities. Let me say this too, and then I'll open it up to some questions because I've got a little longer than I think I'm supposed to. And I want to talk about scholarships and law school and in public policy. Very different from when I went to law school. Law schools today are very competitive. They're competitive for the best students. And scholarships clearly are available to law schools around the country, including the University of Florida, where in the past that was fairly rare. Merit scholarships. That, of course, taking a holistic view of your application, grades, Lsat, resume, letters of recommendation, and your essay. A lot of times you can see there are scholarships available. And quite frankly, you can negotiate some of those scholarships if you're in the fortunate position of a number of schools maybe wanting you. It is also true on the MPP side. Here at Jacksonville University, we consider our students for merit scholarships. We have a particular fund for African-American candidates set up by some donors. It's an MPP Minority Fellowship and Scholarship Fund. We award 2 fellowships a year. This started 3 years ago, a fund set up specifically for that purpose for African-American candidates. We also have a public service scholarship fund. Now, we're pretty affordable anyway, but we also recognize that graduate school can be challenging. We're at a private university, it's affordable, but we also offer merit scholarships. So that's one thing to keep in mind. There's a lot of different aspects of what we can cover today, but I will close with a little bit of a preachy moment, which is this. Here at the Institute, we have core values that we bring right into the classroom. We're nonpartisan, we're not Republican or Democrat. At the Institute, in addition to the academic program, we put on a lot of public policy programs here at Jacksonville University. We have partnerships, for example, with Notre Dame. We do an annual Hesburgh lecture, wonderful collaboration and partnership with the Graham Center that Senator Bob Graham asked us to follow up on, and we were so thrilled he did because we really embrace what you're doing at the Graham Center. So we have those partnerships here at the university. But we started a while back, 6 years ago, approached a local TV station, and we did a televised debate. We did one. That has now led to federal, that state debates here on campus, federal, and the governor's race. Ron DeSantis and Adam Putnam were one night, all the Democrats were the next. We've now hosted 12 live televised debates here on the Jacksonville University campus. We hope to be doing it again next year. We've had over 70 programs on the campus over the last several years, lectures, conferences, forums, panel discussions, and televised debate. So we've become a nonpartisan, neutral gathering place that our students enjoy. And then there's a third piece of the Institute. We are actively engaged in the community and civic engagement. They turn to us for training of elected officials, turn to us for panel discussions and keynotes. I've had the great honor of moderating both on the Republican and Democratic side some big interviews for the city, and of course, television and radio commentary. The background you're seeing is some of the background I use sometimes for quite a bit of usually it's in studio, but I do a lot of television and radio commentary. My children like to say I have a good face for radio. You can appreciate that. And so, but the Institute itself, whether it's the academic program, the gathering, being a convener of programs on campus, or engaged in the community, we all do it with a sense of these core values of integrity, civility, accountability, courage, and stewardship. And it's an important part of our identity. I hope that all of you, there's a part of you that takes a look at these values and that there's a piece that says, whether I go the law school route, whether I go the criminal justice route, the public policy route, and by the way, those are overlapping, they're not necessarily separate, that you'll do it with a servant's heart, and you'll do it with the notion of stewardship for creating a better future for your community. With a law degree, with an MPP degree and a servant's heart, it's remarkable what you can accomplish in your community. So with our graduates, we hope our graduates will take their knowledge, their skill set, the values, the network of people they meet, and they'll go out and do great things to create a better future for the community. So with that, went a little bit longer than I think I was supposed to, but I can open it up to some questions that you may have about anything you like about the practice of law, about careers in the law, about careers in public policy, or the criminal justice system.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Mullaney. That was wonderful. So we do have two questions in the chat, both from Sophia, two Sophias, but first from Sophia de la Cruz. Sophia, do you want me to read it, or would you like to unmute yourself and speak?
I can just ask it. Also, I sent a second one. I'm not sure if it went through, but I can ask that later so everyone has time. But I frequently heard like statistics and economics and just having a math background or business is really useful for public policy. And I agree with that. But I was just curious, how beneficial do you think acquiring an economics or statistics degree is? And do you think that these are essential to have to increase our access to different jobs in the government or in NGOs? Like, how beneficial do you think those are, and are they necessary?
The short answer is yes, yes, and yes. Hope you're smiling when I say that, Sophia, because I'll go through each of those questions to explain what each yes, yes, yes means. Let's talk about the fundamentals of public policy. Our curriculum, we have 9 core courses. And while I say the best class is law and public policy, we also have a course on microeconomics and public policy, and we have a course on public finance. Part of that is I actually went and visited a number of schools developing our curriculum. I went to Georgetown, Duke, Harvard, went to a bunch of great schools. And in the end, public policy is built on, it's a very interdisciplinary degree. Public policy is, the MPP is very interdisciplinary. It's not like my brother who's an accountant who did all accounting classes, or my wife's brother who's an engineer who did all engineering. Here, it's very interdisciplinary. But the two biggest schools for public policy are economics and political science, interdisciplinary beyond that. In our curriculum, we encourage, in fact, we kind of require that you have at least some level of statistics in undergraduate school and some level of economics, because in the end, you cannot really do the public's work. You cannot understand public policy unless you have a handle on some of the fundamental economic issues. Take a look at what's going on today with the Fed, with Mr. Powell. Take a look at what's going on with Janet Yellen. Take a look at the $2.3 trillion package that the president is offering. And that's at the national level. Here at Florida, our budget's approaching about $100 billion. But even at the local level, where I think the action is, where you actually have an opportunity to shape things right there on your street or in your city or in your county, if you don't have a fundamental grasp of budgetary issues, and we talk about this in my class, if you don't have a fundamental grasp on economics, you're really going to be struggling in policy. And by the way, in law, the great thing about those courses in math and those other is that they help with critical thinking. They help you on the law school side too, especially if you want to practice that way. So the answer to your question is they are important. I believe in law school, although as I've told my children, I would encourage you to take lots of classes in undergrad. There's no one major, of course, to go to law school. There's no one course that you should take, but that diverse background is helpful. There should be a political science class. There should be economics. My children ignored me. I encouraged accounting classes, actually, at least take one semester of accounting so you can speak the language. When I was doing lots of litigation, I would be doing depositions in lots of different disciplines. You have to learn it fairly quick. It's always helpful to learn the language. I don't have to be a CPA. So I think you're well served, quite frankly, to have some fundamentals in statistics, some fundamentals in economics. Now, by the way, schools around the country, MPP schools vary as to how demanding they are on the quantitative side. Some are extraordinarily quantitative, some are less so. I'd put ourselves somewhere in the middle or lower middle, because while we have research methods and we have quantitative work, it's not nearly as quantitative as some schools. Some are more qualitative, but I think those courses serve you well in public policy graduate school, and I also think they serve you well in law school. So if the answer is, should you be taking some of those courses, my answer to that would be yes.
Okay, thank you. So it's more about like the courses than the degree itself.
It doesn't have to be the degree. No, it doesn't. We have, just like for law school, John Delaney, my good friend, who was mayor, I was chief of staff to him, he's president of the University of, he was a history major. When I went to the University of Florida, I was a political science major. My daughter, who went to law school, was an English major. It's not any particular, and in public policy, we have it's very similar entering our class. We have a lot of political science majors in public policy. We have a lot of economics. We have a lot of history, sociology, criminal justice. It's very, very diverse. By the way, just as on a personal note, my mother, God bless her, who never got to go to college, never went, had more wisdom than all the PhDs I ever met. She didn't learn to speak English until grade school. And she used to always say, there are two things in the world that can never be taken away from you. One is your faith, one is your education. And she said the education was the key to a better life. And she wasn't just talking about making money. And my mother very much tried to instill in me and in my two younger brothers how critically important this was, a full education, not just trade school. I take exception with some of the current thought that no disrespect to the narrow areas to simply make a living. I think it's about that, but I also think it's about critical thinking. It's about embracing so much, and the liberal arts degree helps you do that. And so I'm very embracing of those liberal arts degrees. And quite frankly, those are the degrees that are oftentimes a pipeline into law school and into graduate school in the public policy side. And I would hope, think about this for a second. In the White House, when they're making critical decisions about the future, in Congress when they are, in the State House, don't you hope that somebody, when they're having those closed meetings, don't you hope that they are well-versed in history, literature, economics, and all of it when they're trying to weigh all the different factors in some of the decision-making they made. When I was at City Hall for 20 years, I typically got involved in issues that did not involve just legal issues. I typically got involved when the issues were more complicated than that. The problem comes to you as a problem, not separated out where here's the financial issues, here's the racial issues, here's the economic issues, here's the legal issues. You have to solve problems. And that interdisciplinary background is really, really helpful. So I wouldn't be concerned that the major has you out of place for going forward. I doubt that. I would encourage being smart about the classes you take.
Thank you for that. Funny enough, my dad also wants me to take an accounting class because he says the same thing. So
I strongly encourage that. I mean, I encourage history, I encourage philosophy, I encourage accounting, I certainly encourage economics. Undergraduate school is an opportunity to take a wide range of courses. And then, of course, in graduate school, you can get more focus.
Certainly. So next we'll do Sophia Krinos put in 3, but we'll do 1 from her, then go down to Nina, back to Sophia de la Cruz, and then we'll circle back to Sophia Krinos, just to give a little outline. So
Okay.
Her first question is, since you've been in quite a few different fields, which of your jobs has been your favorite? In particular, can you tell us about how your work-life balance and job fulfillment compared in your different jobs?
That's a great question. You know, it's funny. I will admit to you that I've always worked a lot of hours. I think that's true of people in the legal profession and people in professional life. And I was in a panel discussion once and they were saying, okay, tell me about family life and tell me about how you do work-life balance. And I was on this panel, and all these other 3 people had all these great answers of how they had perfectly solved it. And when it came to me, I said, I don't have the perfect answer to that. There's only one thing I will tell you about the work-family life balance when you're early in your career and you're just starting out with a new company or a new law firm. And that is, especially if you have a significant other, and I was married, still am married, same wife, that whatever it is, it needs to be something that you and your spouse agree on. It needs to be something that the 2 of you worked out. There were times when I was in trial and when I was working around the clock. That's just the reality of trial work. And if you don't have a great understanding in your family about that, it can be kind of painful for the family. And that is always something that at least in my family, it worked out pretty well. I was very fortunate. Now, I said I had a mixed marriage. She went to FSU. No one's perfect, but we've been blessed with 3 children. And she worked actually in the public defender's office as an investigator for 22 years. And then after our 3rd child, who was born at 1 pound, 11 ounces, she stayed home after the 3rd child. That was a choice she made. And that was a good choice for us in our family. I think it's a personal thing in the family as to how you work it out. But I'll be clear on this. it's a real commitment of hard work and long hours when you're starting your career at a law firm or at a new company or at a nonprofit or a new enterprise. If you want it to be successful, it takes quite a bit of time. And having that and being on the same page and working it out with your spouse is an important part of that success. The other part to the question is, what did I enjoy the most? I will tell you something. I've been so fortunate. I loved my years as a prosecutor. I think it's hard to beat because despite the current environment in which prosecutors maybe get a bit of a rap as to what they do and how they do it. The truth is, prosecutors, their duty under the law is to do justice, to do the right thing. It's the one little niche in the legal community where your obligation is to do justice and the right thing. And I used to feel like we did some good, and I enjoyed the work in the courtroom. And there's camaraderie because everyone's the same age. I had 6 buddies back in the 80s. We were all working together. We went on a whitewater rafting trip. We've done it for twice a year for 32 years now. We just got back from 2 weeks ago. Our next trip's October 6th. And it's still the camaraderie you built in the DA's office. So did I enjoy that? Yes. Do I think most people enjoy those years either in the public defender's office or the state attorney's office? They do. The years at City Hall were terrific for a different reason. They were terrific because we did, I believe during this time, we got to do so much good in bringing the Jaguars here, in passing the Better Jacksonville plan, and doing the preservation project in which we acquired 10% of the county and took it out of development to save it for recreational purposes. If you love your community, I hope you love your city and love your state, you get the satisfaction of hopefully of doing some good. It wasn't as, quote, fun, let's say, as being a prosecutor. I think everyone will tell you that those are great years, long hours, but great years. But truly what I'm doing now at the Institute, this is my 10th year here at Jacksonville University in the Institute, is probably the most significant because I believe that the graduates of this program can go on and do great things to help shape the future of the state and the country. And so this is probably the most significant thing. But I've been pretty fortunate. I've been out over 40 years, and this is a real blessing. I have always liked going to work and doing what I do. Now, I think some would tell you that I probably worked a little too much. I plead guilty to that, but I've always enjoyed it. So that's a kind of a meandering, wandering question. I will tell you that I think most people would tell you that their years in the public arena, prosecution side or public defender side, are years that they very much enjoyed.
Thank you. So this next one is from Nina. Nina, if you'd like to unmute and ask it yourself, feel free, but I can read it as well. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I can read it.
Hi, Nina.
Hello, Mr. Mullaney. Thank you so much for your time and for coming here and speaking with us. I really appreciate it. So my question is, I'm in my 2nd year right now, and I'm debating, it's kind of a general kind of question, but I'm debating between going to graduate school and law school. I kind of always assumed I would go to graduate school, but as I learn more about law school, I'm kind of wondering if maybe I should change my path in that direction. And I know there are programs where you can kind of do both at the same time, but my question is kind of what qualities and goals do you think set someone more towards the graduate school track versus the law school track, and like what really makes those two types of paths different from each other to kind of help make that decision. I kind of need help making the decision, so I'm hoping you can give me some wisdom as to that question.
Well, Nina, let me ask you a question. When you say you're thinking about graduate school, that's pretty broad. I know what you mean by law school. Okay, I've narrowed that to 200 schools. For grad school, what kind of graduate school are you considering?
So something in the field of criminology or public policy.
One of the things I would tell you is to give serious consideration to a dual degree. I know that. Are you frowning already?
my concern with that is because I already hear about how intense graduate school and law school are on their own. I'm worried if I kind of did some sort of dual program that I would just never sleep. So I guess I kind of have to do more research on that, but I'm kind of just worried that it will be too much. I don't know.
Yeah, let me talk about that for a second. First of all, you can only go to one class at a time, and you can only do it one semester at a time. And typically the way it works around the country for most, we'll talk about JD, MPP, for example. The typical dual degree model would be your first year in law school. Your 2nd year would be in the MPP program. I'm going to give you the Harvard model. That's what they do at Harvard. They do it a bunch of places. And then your 3rd year would be a combination of MPP and JD. What that does is it saves you a year because It takes 5 years if you do it separate, 3 years of law school, 2 years for your MPP degree. It saves you a year, saves a bit of money because of that. It gives you an additional expertise that others don't have. I also think it helps distinguish you in the marketplace in the sense that in a competitive world, it is one of those things that kind of does set you apart because it is more extraordinary to have both degrees. Having said that, that's not for everybody. If they did not offer an MPP-JD back when I was in law school, if they had, I would have given it serious consideration because the relationship between the two is so close. The two involve two very different career paths. Two different paths in terms of course of study. Law school itself is very much about critical thinking. Law school, of course, is demanding, but I want to be careful about that because my two older students, my two older children in particular, both of them outstanding students, both of them being intimidated, and I had to get them confident that this is nothing to be intimidated about, that it's very doable, and it certainly is very doable. I don't want the stories and the secondhand stories you hear make it sound like it's the worst thing ever. It is not that. I'll say something that's really odd. I enjoyed school as an undergrad, and oddly enough, for some, I believe I didn't love exams, but I enjoyed law school just fine. I enjoyed the camaraderie, and I enjoyed law school. Did reasonably well, but that was thanks to Gertrude Block. And so I wouldn't view it as this horrible thing that lies in your future. I would view it as an opportunity and a pathway to a better future and to other opportunities. The law school, the law degree opens up a variety of possibilities, but I wouldn't do it just to have the degree. For those people who want to practice law and to be lawyers, that is the pathway. If you want to be in the courtroom, if you want to draft contracts, if you want to represent certain types of people, you can, whether it's civil rights litigation, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's torts, whether it's real estate, whether it's land use, then that's the pathway. The MPP is a little vaguer, sometimes less well-defined, but it has lots of opportunities in the public and nonprofit areas in particular, and some private. That's why I'm saying this is a personal choice that no one can decide this one for you. It really isn't. But I do think the nice thing about both is that you will meet people you wouldn't meet otherwise, and opportunities will come along that you may never have considered. And some of that very much has happened to a lot of my good friends and to me, simply because that's who you're meeting with and working with. So I wish I would have a really simple answer for you as to, if you break it down as to which path to choose, that's one where you have to talk to your family and do some soul searching. But I'll say this, my father would say, who since passed away years ago, it's a nice problem to have. If you have a lot of these choices, and that's really the one thing I encourage students to excel in the classroom, to create options for themselves and choices among graduate schools, choices among law schools, and then ultimately choices in career paths in what you're doing. Once you start work, it's all about how you perform at work. That becomes so critical as to what your future will be. So I would encourage you while you're young, however, to think big, and to do those things that create possibilities for your future.
No, that was great. Thank you. If I can ask a quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Another, I think, worry I have is that I already think you're going to disagree with this, but I
don't know what it is, but I'm ready to.
It's okay. No, I guess I worry that the dual program, it kind of might look a bit like I've rushed through things, that like I might not, because other students are just focusing on law school for 3 years, or other are just focusing on grad school. So do you think that's like something that employers kind of think at all, that they might think that the students that went through the dual program, that they might have like rushed through both programs instead of like just committing to one?
I think the employers may potentially could view it just the opposite. One of the things that people could, although it saves you a year, it actually takes 1 year longer than law school. Law school, 3 years, typically. You could go summers and try to shorten it up, but it's still basically 3 years. Your MPP degree is typically 2, so it's 5. It's 4 years if you do the dual degree. And by the way, I don't want to put all the eggs in the dual degree basket. That's just one possibility. But I don't think it carries necessarily that disadvantage. One thing that's a little bit challenging is in your second year to go to a different course of study with a different cohort. That is something that people have to adjust to, because then you come back to the law school. Now here at JU, for a lot of our students, What they do is they'll do their first year MPP here, 15 credits in the fall, 15 in the spring. And then we give 12 credits for going to law school. So there's only 6 credits remaining, which is the writing requirement. And that's done over the next 3 years while you're in law school. And it sometimes is combined with the legal writing requirement in law school so that when you graduate, you get both degrees. But we actually, so you can start here and then it's a little, then law school. But in answer to your question, I don't necessarily view it as looking at it as though it's been rushed. In fact, I think it does take a little more time, but I do think that it can help set you apart in a competitive marketplace.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that. I've been at that fork in the road multiple times. But really quick, we have someone from the center, Dr. H, would like to kind of just add a little bit. So
Sure.
Dr. H, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hakeem Hassan. I'm the new Civic Engagement Coordinator for the Bob Graham Center here at the University of Florida. And I just wanted to piggyback off of Nina's last question. Before I do that, Mr. Mullaney, thank you so much for being with us and for having this presentation. It's very valuable. I wish I could have sat through this a few years ago when I was deciding whether or not I was going to get my master's in political science or my JD. I ended up doing both. So I'm a double gator, political science department. I spent 5.5 years at UF. Undergrad, poli-sci, master's in political science with a graduate certificate in public affairs. So the MA-PA program here. And then I went to Michigan State Law, which is the old DCL Law College. I saw you put a plug for Detroit, so go 313.
I'm a bit of a, I got to warn you, I'm a little bit of a Wolverine. So I've got, but that's
hey, go green. But no, Nina, your point is great. I'll just live on my own path because I know there's a couple of questions that I want them to be asked. But when I was sort of at the intersection of grad school versus law school, I ended up going straight into grad school and then law school after. And that was really because of just financial and personal circumstances. I had gotten a grant through so I was a member of the Florida National Guard at military service. And so they gave me a grant to go to grad school, but it had to be in a state university. So that's what answered it for me. So I just put that out there because whether it's a spouse situation, a family situation, an opportunity like grant or funding, take advantage of it because you can never have enough education. So I did that.
I share that, by the way.
And I figured, hey, I was going to go to law school eventually. Having the master's first was going to strengthen my writing skills, make me a better public speaker. And I always knew that I wanted to go back to policy, academia, or the state legislature. And that's still where I see myself when my hair turns gray. So after that, I ended up going on to law school. I had a great time in Michigan. I learned a lot. I will say, as far as the specializations, whatever graduate program you choose versus law school is going to teach you the critical thinking. It's going to teach you how to approach questions in a very different way. But as far as specializing, I didn't really specialize my law school until the summers when I was working at a firm.
There's no doubt about that.
Say again?
You don't learn how to practice law in law school. That's after you.
Exactly. And so the flavor of law that I wanted, that was really dependent on my own outside internships and work that you can do in externships. So I worked at an employment law firm in Phoenix, Arizona after my first year of law school, came back, completed my 2L year. After my 2L year, I went and did an externship with the Michigan House of Representatives in their general counsel's office as far as policy, because I knew I liked statutes. I knew I liked con law. That was really rewarding for me. And then I ended up moving back to Florida because of family. So I will say that some folks in my cohort that did do a dual degree, it's because they, after their first year of law school or through their first year of law school, they knew the kind of law they wanted to go into. And a lot of the times you'll see that only after doing some of law school. So I know a couple of good friends who did a joint program with the business school at Michigan State. And so they ended up picking up an MBA because they knew they wanted to work in corporate law. And so that really gave them an advantage of having that niche. And so I guess the long, short way around this is the quicker you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years, there are opportunities and programs and the work is definitely worth it. And there are going to be advisors like Mr. Mullaney, like myself, like others who will help you get that pathway. So that's just what I wanted to say there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, before we go, let me make sure I do this. Let me give you all my cell number and my email address. And honestly, feel free to call me or to email me. My cell, please feel free to call. It's area code 904 and it's 955-1857. Area code 904-955-1857. And my email address, we try to make that difficult here. It's R as in Rick, MULLAN1 at ju.edu. RMULLAN1 at ju.edu. But let me just make a second comment. So I hope that contact information, please feel free to use it. And I want to comment on something Hakeem said, which is really true. For many of you, however, there may be uncertainty about what that passion is or what it looks like or what you're going to do. I don't want you to feel like you're alone in that. That's true for many, even when they graduate from law school, and they have to practice a bit before they find their footing or find their path for what they really like. The real blessing is to enjoy what you do, like I said, and to find the niche where you can align your passion and interest and skill set with the needs of your clients or your organization. And I go back to the public policy thing, because the other thing too to keep in mind is on the public policy side, the combination of law and public policy, but also I hope there's a part of you that want to do that sort of public service community good piece, and you can do that in practice, and you can also do that from the public sector.
Thank you so much to both Hakeem and Mr. Mullaney for that. We have two more questions in the chat. So first, I'll pass it over to Sophia De La Cruz, and then Sophia Krinos, if you want to unmute afterwards and ask your question, feel free, or I can read it as well. But Sophia De La Cruz, you have one. Go for it. You have a little bit of time left.
So I think you kind of answered my question a little bit through answering Sophia Krinos and Hakeem. But I asked earlier, throughout your years of experience, what have you found is the most fulfilling and impactful way to make a positive difference? So specifically in your experience, has it been like volunteering with people one-on-one? Like what has ended up being the most fruitful and you can see like tangible impacts from that work the most?
You know, it's a really good question. You know, at the personal level, when you help somebody one-on-one, it's obviously very rewarding. For example, my daughter, who did the English major, did Teach for America after undergraduate school. She went to William and Mary undergrad, and then she did Teach for America. And she really loved helping those children. But I also told her that as rewarding as that is, when you can do something structural, if you can do something on a big stage, if you can do something that helps shape the direction and policy of your community, you can affect many lives. In fact, you can affect the entire future of a city. I'll give you one example. John Delaney came down to my office. He was mayor at the time and said, I'm concerned about too much development on the south of Jacksonville. I want to direct it north and west. What about a growth moratorium? We did some research and we came back to him. And by the way, I saw that from Allie, who I know from Jacksonville. And so came back to him and said, after our research, we recommend a land-based, a market-based land acquisition program. And that became the basis of the preservation project, in which we acquired over 80 miles, over 10% of the county, for environmental and recreational purposes. Now, you don't get the personal satisfaction of a one-on-one, because there's a lot of satisfaction in that. But if you can, for the future of your entire community, develop parklands and open space and environmental areas for your future, there's a great deal of satisfaction in trying to create a better future. For example, recent half-cent sales tax for education here in Jacksonville, which I very much supported. A half-cent sales tax for John Delaney, I drafted and supported for the $2 billion in infrastructure improvements. And now here, those are things that help shape the future. Right now, for me, it is really rewarding to attract talented students in the MPP program, get to know them, and try to prepare them so that they can help shape the future of the state and the country. And so it's a hard question, because certainly, and this is one of the nice things about the law path and about the public policy path, the criminal justice path, is there is the opportunity to do a lot of good. There's an opportunity to like what you do beyond simply making a good living, which is a good thing. But weighing what is the most is hard. I can tell you about criminal cases I handled, a homicide case in which I wish we had all day, in which the woman who was murdered, her mother, I got to know her pretty well, and we had our trial. And 1 year after her death, I was at a mass where the mother was, and everybody had forgotten her, and how much it meant to her that I was there, and what she did in that case, and how much what we did helped her. Those are things you don't forget. And you always get to have that servant's heart in the DA's office and doing the public's good. But you also can use your degree. You can use your talent. You can use your energy to create a better future. In the end, my father used to always say that in the end, When you become a servant, the possibilities are endless. And it's ironic that by doing things for others is the greatest thing you can do for yourself, but I really do believe that. I do believe that. And so if you're willing to do the sacrifice of the hard work of graduate school, whether it's law or public policy, you can create possibilities in which you not only do great things for you and your family, you create the possibility of changing the future for the state and quite frankly, even beyond. And so I'd like to encourage you to think that way and to think about the values I talked about, this integrity piece, this civility piece, which in the last few years, we could have a whole separate discussion on that, but how critically important that is. And stewardship, where you put the community first. It's a wonderful question. I hope it's a part of everyone's thinking, but you can take this education from the University of Florida and your goal can solely be to make money, which I don't think is the way to go about it. Or your goal can be you can make money in lots of ways, but you can also do things that can really make a huge difference in the future of the state and of the country. Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for those insights. So we have one more from Sophia Krinos, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for being here today.
Is everybody named Sophia here? I just thought I'd check.
I usually go by Sophie. I don't know why it says Sophie. It's like because I'm on like my UF login, so you can call me Sophie if that helps.
That's it. Yeah.
But yeah,
Just
my question's like you answered like the other question. It was about like law school and like comparing the graduate program. But I was wondering like what your opinion on like, you know how some people have like a favor for like going and doing other things before you go to law school after undergrad. So like my question would be like, do you think there's like value in like taking a gap year or like doing other things before you go to law school? Or do you recommend just like going straight from undergrad into like law school or a graduate program?
It's a great question, and it's a great one for us to conclude on because I don't have the right answer, but you can weigh this. I've had this debate with both of my children who have ignored my advice. And by that, I meant with my oldest daughter. My concern is this. I've encouraged my children who have ignored me on this, after undergraduate school, to go straight to law school or graduate school because of my concern that it's easy to get sidetracked and it's easy to have a significant other, to make a little bit of money that you mistake as a lot of money. It's really a little money, but you think it's a lot of money. And you get used to making some of that money and you end up not coming back. Now, I think because they rejected my advice when I encouraged it, so you can feel free to reject it too, they were determined to prove me wrong. And so my oldest daughter, for example, she did do Teach for America, which I certainly supported. But then she had a boyfriend in Chicago, so she went to Chicago and she ended up going to Northwestern and she got a master's degree at the Medill School there in journalism. Then she went to law school there and she practiced in Chicago for a bit. Then my son also has gone to work for a little bit, but now he's getting a master's degree and then he's going to come back. And so each of them took 3 to 4 years before they went to law school. And at least they did, my concern was that they wouldn't do it. My concern is that you can get sidetracked. Do I think if you have the discipline to have some work experience and bring that back to school, do I think that's valuable? I do. Do I think it's a mature and a different perspective? Yes. And there's value there. But I guess this is more a parent's concern. You're at a unique time, most of you, you're at a unique time in which you have the opportunity to focus on the single greatest investment, which is you, in your education, in your skill set, in your knowledge. And you've got a window here to do that. And so I like to take that youth and I encourage my own children, I'd encourage you to think about how best to spend that time. I think for many, it's very valuable to go work and then come back. But I also know that many go to work and never do return, and they don't regret it necessarily. But I'm a believer, the earlier person who said it, I'm just a great believer in the more education, the better. I am a great advocate of getting the best education you could get. My wife would tease me, she says, yeah, and you had to pay for it too, because you couldn't convince any of them. I tried to convince them to become fellow Gators, but they wanted to go elsewhere and they could have gotten the best education here. But in answer to your question, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I know people that have done it successfully both ways. As a parent, I always got concerned that my children would be sidetracked and not make it back. And so I've encouraged them to go through. But if you have the discipline, there are certainly a lot of people who've gone to work and then come back and they bring a maturity and a perspective that serves them and their classmates well. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and so with that, I think we can close out the program today. Thank you so much, Mr. Rick Mullaney. That was really a clarifying discussion, and I think provided a lot of insight for undergrads that are considering both options. Myself, that was a lot of great advice. So thank you. And to everyone here, we will be sending out the recording, a link to the recording, as well as Mr. Mullaney's contact that he gave out here. If you weren't quick enough to note it down, then we'll send it out with an email with the recording. And that concludes our program for today and our series. So Marianne, if you want to take it away.
No, you did a great job. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed hearing it. Thank you, Rick, so much for your time. Appreciate
You're welcome.
it.
Great
Thanks,
being with all of you.
everyone. Talk soon. Bye.